Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. The topic for today is elective egg freezing. Should we think about it? Should we do it? And when we should do it. The wonders of assisted reproductive technology and the science that's gone with it have blossomed over the last 40 years. What in 1978 was regarded as a brave new world experiment to produce Louise Brown has now produced over 7 million babies worldwide. That technology keeps advancing. To create a pregnancy requires eggs of good quality and obviously good sperm. Increasingly in our society, there are a group of women who can't seem to find good sperm, and there is no good male on the horizon at a time when they've got good eggs. Therefore, is an option to take the eggs and put them on ice. If you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said, don't bother. The technology for freezing eggs was primitive with very poor success. Probably 1 to 2% chance of a pregnancy for every egg collected. 5 or 6 years ago, however, a new technology came along. It doesn't seem very clever, and it is very simple. In the past, we used to gradually cool the eggs from room temperature down to minus 80 degrees where they sat in storage in liquid nitrogen tanks forever, basically. They could have, but at least until they were required. Today, or 5 years ago in fact, and now we use it regularly today, we have a technique called vitrification, which in simplistic terms means taking an egg, draining the water out of it using chemicals to do so, and then just dropping it into liquid nitrogen, which immediately drops it to minus 80 degrees, where it can sit, probably forever, awaiting use by fertilizing with sperm. That technology has moved the chances of an egg producing a pregnancy from less than 2% to now somewhere between 8 and 10% per egg. That may not seem particularly good, except when you multiply out egg numbers. So if you can harvest 20 eggs at 8% or 10% per egg, you can see the odds of a pregnancy are really quite high. You may need to or use all those eggs to get that pregnancy, but certainly the chances of success are now acceptable. In the United States, the peak body in reproductive medicine, the ASRM, have now said that egg freezing is no longer an experiment. It's an acceptable form of treatment. So who should freeze eggs? Some people say it's the desperate single. Well, probably that's partly true, but it's people who are probably thinking ahead. Girls, women in their 20s, planning out their career, they're on the rise, they've got their university degree, they've got their MBA, they're serious career goals whose focus isn't on a family life at this point in their lives. One day it will be. They haven't yet found Mr. Right, and probably even if they have found Mr. Right, if he's on a similar trajectory, he's not keen to have babies yet. So that is the ideal candidate. The 28 to 33-year-old, I would say, is the prime group to be thinking about egg freezing. Why not younger? Well, there are many young women who are younger who will find a man before they're 30 and will decide that family is more important than career, and probably spending the money on egg freezing isn't appropriate. Because egg freezing, certainly in Australia, is not covered by Medicare. One cycle is something in the order of $10,000. So you have to be reasonably well off to be contemplating it. What about women who are over 35? Should they be considering egg freezing? Well, there are 2 or 3 issues about being over 35 that should make one think very strongly before spending the money and going through a cycle. Whereas an egg in a 28-year-old has a 8 to 10% chance of producing a pregnancy, by 35 that's probably down to 5%. By 40, each egg has probably only got a chance of about 1%, maybe even less. So thinking about egg freezing later in life is probably missing the boat. It will create false hope. The reasons for those poor outcomes with eggs being frozen in those older age groups is the original egg quality. We know that age impacts quality. We know it impacts the genetic makeup of the egg. We know that fertilization rates are going to be low, and we know that even if we produce embryos, there's going to be a higher rate of abnormalities, which will prevent implantation, cause miscarriage, and potentially cause Down syndrome. So we certainly discourage older women going down the egg freezing track. Calculations have been done to estimate how many eggs you need at a particular age to give you a 50-50 chance of a baby. These are based on predominantly US figures, because in Australia we don't have all that many women who've got to the point of using their eggs. So if you are 25 and you freeze 20 eggs, it appears you've got something in the order of a 50 to 60% chance of a baby. At 30, 20 eggs gives you barely a 50% chance of a pregnancy. To get to 50% at 35, it's been estimated you need 40 to 50 eggs to give you that 50-50 chance. And by 40, it's 120 eggs to give you a 50-50 chance of a pregnancy. But the irony is that to get 20 eggs when you're 25 is probably one cycle of treatment. At 35, to get 35, 40 eggs will take 3 or 4 cycles at 10,000 each. At 40, egg yields are 2 or 3 per cycle. So you can see how unrealistic it is to contemplate egg freezing at 40. The method of stimulating the cycle is similar to a normal IVF cycle. A period comes, injections begin on a daily basis, pushing normal single ovulation to multiple follicle development, multiple egg development. After about 2 weeks, an egg collection will occur, and those eggs will then be frozen. You will have a period, probably 7 to 10 days afterwards and resume normal cycles after that. No procedure is without complications, and obviously before entering into egg freezing, one has to be aware of those. In fact, the risks are incredibly rare. It is highly unlikely that you will impair your future fertility by going through an IVF cycle for egg collection and egg freezing. The tiny risks, because we are introducing a needle through the vaginal wall into the ovary, is the risk of introducing infection. It's estimated the risk of that of a serious nature is less than 1 in 1,000. The ovary is next door to some fairly major blood vessels. The chances of hitting one of those blood vessels and causing bleeding that requires operative intervention is probably less than 1 in 5,000. When we stimulate the ovaries, we can overstimulate them. That used to be a serious problem, but with a new approach to the final maturation of the follicles, of the eggs, with something called a GnRH analog, the chances of hyperstimulation, even when we've got lots of eggs, is now less than 1 in 500. But we have to be aware of those complications for what is an elective procedure. So the evidence is interesting in terms of the use of those eggs. In the United States, where they've been doing it fairly regularly for the last 10 years, it's almost become an industry in its own right, with ice parties being held in smart bars around New York for the young, trendy 28 to 35-year-old women being invited along for a drink and education about how they should participate in egg freezing. That's received a lot of criticism of the commercialisation of it. But I think they are worthwhile as an education process for women in this age group who perhaps haven't thought about childbearing at all. And at least this is bringing an option to them. But perhaps more importantly is making them think about their future fertility and being educated about the fact that age is important in terms of your chances of having a child. But the evidence that follows is that probably less than 20% of all women who have frozen eggs will ever go back and get them. Why is this? Well, a decision you make at 30 to freeze your eggs is then followed by a number of years where you reach the peak of your career. During that time, you may have found Mr. Right. You settle down and you have your own baby with your own eggs, because we haven't impaired your chances of having your own baby. You've just got this insurance policy sitting in the freezer in the lab. So that's one group who will never use them because they've done it on their own. The next group are those who are now 40 and really are flying in their careers, and really family is never going to be part of their future life. And they will never get the opportunity to use those eggs because they don't want to. Their life is good. So what we have created to some extent is an insurance policy that will never be used by the vast majority of those who've invested in it. But I say to women in their late 20s and early 30s, this is probably an option that you should really contemplate, that you should think about your fertility. And while elective egg freezing won't be for everyone, it does provide some reassurance that one day you'll be able to have the baby that you may have always wanted. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.